Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Senate Education, Wednesday, April 14th, 3:28 in the afternoon. We are continuing on H426. We took testimony, some additional testimony yesterday and have a few outstanding questions. We have Secretary French with us, Mr. Francis, and I believe Ms. Siglowski will be joining us at some point, or Mr. Francis may be representing her today. Ms. Wasserman, if you wouldn't mind, the floor is yours. Help us identify these last decisions that need to be made, or maybe not the last, but these few.
Sure. So I'm just bringing up the most recent amendment. The committee—
Senators, I'm sorry to interrupt, Ms. Wasserman, that I believe Jeannie has that up now.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for the record, Becky Wasserman, Legislative Counsel, this is draft 1.2 of the amendment to H426, and it should reflect some of the changes that were made yesterday and still has some language highlighted that is open for discussion. So just to review quickly, the committee discussed in section 2 of the bill where there's the requirement that the state board update its capital financing outlay financing formula rule, that the funds are appropriated to the Agency of Education of $100,000 to help the state board update that rule, but the money will go directly to AOE to find that technical assistance to help the state board. So that was a decision point that was made yesterday. In section 3 of the bill, one of the decision points was whether the committee wanted to focus on continuing to go forward with the school facilities condition assessment, or focus on just COVID specific projects, or both. And the committee decided to kind of do the path of still doing the assessment while also adding in language for a facilities liaison for school districts. There was some language, and I've just highlighted it on page 4 with respect to what will be included in this assessment that's being done. So in the language you saw yesterday, there are a list of categories that will be included in the report of how to figure out the priority and the highest needs for schools. And one of those categories is building systems condition and performance. So as part of that category in yesterday's draft, there was some language having an assessment being done of buildings' heating systems and when they should be replaced and with what type of system. And so the decision was to move that assessment out of that list of categories and more appropriately put it in subdivision 2 on page 4, which is asking the consultant to do a review of school facility conditions. So I've added here that assessment would also include an assessment of the building heating systems, an estimate of the year the system should be replaced, and if it is a fossil fuel heating system, a determination of which type of non-fossil fuel heating system should replace it. Then moving on to that list of categories I mentioned with respect to building systems, condition, and performance. It was raised that there are other types of health and safety issues that could occur in a building. So I moved the focus that the building systems condition and performance would address health and safety of students and employees, and it wouldn't just be with respect to energy efficiency improvements and indoor air quality. So right now, those two are just used as examples of the kinds of things that would be done to address health and safety of students and employees. But it could be any type of broader broader look at how buildings affect health and safety of those groups. And the committee can also, I think there was some discussion of explicitly naming other types of things in this list. So that I think that's an open question for the committee.
Okay, yes, Senator Perslick. You're muted, Senator.
Sorry. Ms. Wasserman, where is that language about the facility liaison, or do we call it a liaison?
It's further down in
Section
7. Section 9. Sorry, section 10. So that is specific to having a liaison between AOE and school districts on how to use the ESSER funds that were appropriated to those districts to help do COVID specific health and safety projects.
Right. I'm glad we have another opportunity to hear our chair say liaison.
That and La Vaisselle. Returning then, Ms. Wasserman, you mentioned that one of our additional decision points today was on what page?
So page 5,
Yep.
lines 1 through 3.
Mm-hmm.
One of the categories of prioritizing need is building systems, conditions, and performance to address health and safety of students and employees. Right now, that this is a non-exhaustive list that includes here looking at energy efficiency improvements and indoor air quality, but it was raised that there could be other types of building issues that could create health and safety needs, such as lead or PCBs, or just other examples of things. And this is not saying that the contractor would not look at that, but I think a decision point for the committee is if you want to be explicit about some other types of health and safety needs that could arise in a building.
Yeah, and just speaking for myself, I think I want to make sure that, again, we're prioritizing, as I suspect would happen, but making certain that Vermonters know that certain buildings, certain circumstances are going to take priorities over others, given that they may risk the health and safety of those using the building. So I don't know if, Mr. Secretary, if you want to join the conversation now. First of all, congratulations. We did take a vote today. Right now it stands 5-0. We're hoping Senator Terenzini will make it 6-0. We're giving him a little extra time. And but in all seriousness, congrats and thank you. And we'll look forward to sharing this with our colleagues on the floor.
Well, thank you. I look forward to working with you. I appreciate the support. Dan Fredge, Secretary of Education. Just on this conversation, I'm just sort of listening to what you're working on. I think my guess would be this needs assessment needs to be at a certain general level and then would signal further follow-up by a district. So I think, I don't think it's realistic to do like PCB, for example, is a very complex issue, but I think attending to mechanical systems, which is, the sort of integration of heating and ventilation, and getting just a definitive understanding of the age of the facility, what technologies are being employed, their relative age, and so forth. I'm not sure you could do indoor air quality measurement as part of this, but those things to me would signal, particularly on PCBs, what the relative age of facility and what technologies are being used would flag certain facilities for further review as opposed to others. And I think that's sort of the general type of information that we'd be looking for a statewide needs assessment at this point that could be done efficiently and rapidly. It's not going to catch everything, but it will sort of help us with the prioritization and help locals with prioritization of follow-up issues.
So you're saying this is sort of, this is a bit of a symptom, knowing that other things could be there because.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I was going to share with you yesterday, just coincidentally, I had a conversation with Woodstock, and I had done some work with them on an organizational consulting piece prior to becoming secretary, but I consider myself, as I mentioned, a connoisseur of school facilities, and I did have the opportunity to tour the facilities as secretary, a little more detail, and it left a strong impression on me. They have a high school, which is sort of the classic Union high school construction, so like that 1970s sort of construction that many of our high schools in Vermont have. They don't have a dedicated basement. They have crawl spaces, and they have low pressure steam going through those crawl spaces, also with their sewer and electrical. And it's hard to get into those spaces, and and they have now some expertise as a result of Act 46, sort of looking at centrally all of their facilities. And when you look at that complex system, just if we were able to get good dates on that, understand the age of their boiler, understand the fact that they have low pressure steam and it's in crawl spaces, and do they have unit ventilators, that would be enough information to flag a prioritization for follow-up. So I think what we're looking at for a statewide needs assessment that's sort of that quick scan of some common elements across all buildings would be exceedingly useful for prioritization. Wouldn't give us detail on everything, but it would be enough to provide that common basis for prioritization.
And we would capture in that, Mr. Secretary, the riskiest, the most serious situations out there.
Yeah, I think that would be the other thing, to have a professional go through, and if they saw something that was a clear concern, and typical with a visual walkthrough, you're looking for mold, potential indoor, things that would contribute to indoor air quality issues, water, moisture, ceiling tile damage, that kind of stuff.
Committee, Senator Lyons.
I'm good.
You're unmuted. No, you're good. Okay.
I'm good.
Everybody okay? So right now you're comfortable with the language that we have right now. Okay.
I'd say again, I prefer to address and put all our effort into making some progress on these issues now. But if we are going to do a needs assessment, I think it's important to position it at a sort of a general level. So it could be useful for that follow-up, particularly if there's additional federal dollars coming down. We don't have a lot of time, I would think, to do a complex needs assessment or a very detailed. We want to use the benefit of having sort of a uniform set of eyes looking at facilities using a uniform set of criteria to really do sort of a triage and flagging of where those critical needs are. That would be sort of my thinking on how to situate a needs assessment relative to the other work.
No, I think you're right. Given again the timing, and given that we want everything as much ready to go as possible before we start using some of these federal dollars. Committee, everybody seems okay. Ms. Wasserman, you have what you need. Okay, great. Let's continue.
So I think the committee's decision was to leave as
Leave
is.
as is. Yeah.
Okay. So then I think we can move on to section 4 of the bill. There was just a comment yesterday for further discussion that I'm just sort of reviewing this, that the agency had recommended there was some statutory revision to the school construction aid program. And I had put in a question here about whether this funding report should have some recommended statutory language, and the committee had decided not to do that at this stage, to get the funding report done and then look at, and all this other work done, and then look at possible revisions for a new program.
Yep.
Section 5 of the bill is another proposal that came from the Agency of Education about focusing the education quality standards from the school level to the district level. I made some language changes here, which you'll see reflected on page 7. And I think this gets at what the request was, but I will defer to the agency about whether this is in line with what their recommendation was proposing.
Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, I don't have the language in front of me. In some of my testimony is really meant to raise some flags for you, just about areas. This is a bigger scope of work. But I think the issue of situating school facilities inside of quality standards is an important consideration. As I shared with you, Massachusetts as an example. In most states, I would argue it's part of sort of the baseline quality assurance. To what extent we have to bite all that off now or not is an open question. I think we're going to talk, I believe, on Friday a little bit more about the state board and so forth. And one of my bigger concerns as secretary is to ensure that we understand all the work that's in front of us, that's being put forward from the General Assembly and so forth, all the things that we're managing. So I think that there is going to be a need to look at regulation and school quality standards at some point, district quality standards and so forth. It's just important to flag it, I think, at this point, but then to seek to schedule it essentially in a queue with other work, what's doable. Again, the pandemic response is going to have to be the priority, I would argue. And it seems like we have a placeholder, if you will, for the conversation on regulation, which is that conversation with the state board and roles, and we'll talk more about that on Friday a bit. So I would just encourage you, not having the language in front of me, to just take my previous testimony, sort of a flag, if you will, for some areas that to round this off. But sounds like from a coherent standpoint, you'd be well served to focus on your specific goal of addressing facilities and not seek to incorporate every element of what I was providing as a strategy in this bill.
Sure. And when you have an opportunity, it is on our homepage. Just
Okay.
have a look and please provide us with any feedback.
Sure. Happy to do it.
Great, thanks. Okay.
So for purposes of the next draft, should I leave this in as discussion or take it out as something that is not going to be focused on for this bill?
If it's okay, we'll just wait to hear back from Secretary French. If he would be so kind as to email me and Ms. Wasserman after taking a look at the language, that'd be great. Thanks.
Section 6, the committee agreed to changing the bid threshold in statute from 15,000 to 40,000 for when a school board has to publicly advertise bids for certain construction projects.
Yeah.
There were no changes made in section 7 or section 8 of the bill. So that section 7 has to do with training and certification for school facilities management positions. And section 8 is requiring the school districts to have capital improvement plans. Section 8 is creating a position in the Agency of Education that is a limited service position. And one of the questions that came up is whether this position would get benefits. And I did confirm that is the case, that limited service does receive those types of benefits, whereas a contractor would not get that. So I think, I don't know if that's a open question still of.
No, I don't. I think we, let me just get back to it. So you mean, is it an open question whether or not we want to have the limited service position or the contract? Committee, I feel as though we were leaning toward that, again, that limited service position with the hope that, this is a 3-year position. These would be ESSER funds used for this. And in some ways, I see it similar to what we did with what we're hoping to end up doing with literacy. It's, somebody comes in for 3 years and then hopefully after that, that position will, well, with literacy, I certainly hope it will go forward. But with this, people could assess and say, the work is done or we need to continue the position. Secretary French, do you want to weigh in on this at this moment?
Yeah, I think in my previous testimony, I indicated that the contracting out approach is what I would conceive to do with a prioritization on sort of immediately focusing on the ESSER type work that's in front of us. I don't support the idea of using essentially limited one-time funds to even on a temporary basis, with benefits and so forth, staffing a position. I think it also it sets us up for a little sort of, we should do one or the other, not necessarily both. So I just want to make sure that we maintain the coherence on that. But I appreciate the sympathy to the issue, but I don't support the idea of one-time funds for positions.
One-time funds being, though, you're talking about, again, these ESSER funds that can be used for 3 years.
Right.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
my approach would be to contract that out again, particularly in the area of getting started sooner rather than later. It's not clear to me whether even a limited service position, we'd be able to recruit someone fast enough to address the immediate concerns. And, honestly, that immediate concern begins this summer.
Yeah.
There's not 3 years worth of work opportunity. There's really
Yeah.
summers, and we've got to really move forward very quickly right now.
So, Mr. Secretary, you do think, though, if this were a contracted position, you would be able to get things rolling?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that was in the language that I think was previously discussed a few minutes ago, and that's language we support. We are actively working on that right now. We're in conversations with a contractor to do that work.
Yeah. Committee is Ms. Wasserman?
Sorry, I think I just need to clarify for myself. It seems like perhaps these are two, right now the bill is contemplating 2 positions. One being a contracted one for the work that AOE proposed. And then this other position is more focused on the statewide facilities condition assessment, which is different than the contractor position. So I hope that is what the language says. So I just want to clarify that these would not be, that this work is not being contemplated being done by one contractor.
Yeah, my understanding of what we have in terms of parts here, we have the idea of doing a revision of the rules, essentially, which is a technical piece of work that originally for the state board, it's $100,000. That's I'll call it a contracted service that we would need additional technical expertise. And then we have the issue of sort of the immediate facilities issues relative to the ESSER funds, COVID, or staffing a limited service position to kind of address the 2 issues, sort of the immediate aspects. You're shaking your head, so I'm thinking if I'm wrong or.
So that's a policy decision for the committee, but right now the bill is drafted such that those are 2 different positions. So
Right.
there's the limited service position that is going towards the conditions assessment, and then a second contracted position, because you're correct, there is that one for the state board rule. So the second contracted position would be for the more COVID sort of urgent projects.
Yeah.
Is that, yep, you agree, Secretary French? Both?
I agree. We know the 3 parts. I would say I would prefer 2 parts to 3. I see the 2, the limited service position sort of being the same function I'm proposing to do through a contracted service. Not for the rule, take the rule piece off to the side.
Right,
That's
absolutely.
separate. Yeah.
Senator Persily.
So in section 8, where we talk about this limited service position, there isn't language here about what that person is doing really. So is that somewhere else, or am I just missing something?
Would you repeat that question? Just
the question, it said section 8, there will be a funded limited service position to implement this act. So that, I guess that's the role of this position, to implement the whole act.
Yeah, and so that's a good point, that when this was originally drafted, to implement the act meant doing the work related to the funding report and to the statewide conditions assessment, because this other COVID work was not in there. But if you, I think that's a good point, that if you do have these separate paths going on, that limited service position description would have to make clear that it's implementing, sections 1 through 7 of the act, or whichever, all the sections except for section 10.
All right. Yeah, that's think. And then what Secretary French, what you're saying is you would rather just hire a contractor to do that implementation work for the agency.
Yeah, I wouldn't hire a contractor. I'd contract for a contractor, just to draw the distinction. Yeah.
I mean, personally, I'm comfortable with that. I mean, you're in the driver's seat more than we are on this. And if you're telling us that you can't get, limited service position filled as quickly as a contractor, Senator Hooker.
Is that a consideration, Secretary French, with this position, or was that with the COVID-related positions?
Well, I was with Senator Campion there, and I don't know, Senator Hooker, you threw me down a different path, but I apologize. So we're take the piece off the table about doing the rules. That's a separate contract, the $100,000, right? So I think we're talking about one position to help the agency help districts coordinate and spend their money on facilities. And the question is whether that should be a temporary or limited service employee or a contractor. And I would recommend, as I did previously in my testimony, that this be contracted out. I don't think the General Assembly is contemplating doing both, though both have been assembled as part of the legislative process.
Right.
So no,
and I'm inclined to switch and not have it a limited service position, given what you've said about the need to get this started now, basically, and that it is easier to get that contracted out than go through this hiring process. And I'm looking.
Yeah, and again, we're in the process of like sort of finalizing a procurement relationship with an entity to do this. So we not only are able to move quickly, but we also think we have the right resource identified to help do the work. So we're really it's really ready to go.
Senator Persley.
So there's three. I'm sorry if I'm confused. There's in section 10, there's hiring a person there. That's the person that would be hired to to do the assessment, right? Or that's like a whole firm, I guess. Or no, that's the contractor that's doing the project coordination and serving as a liaison in section 10. And there's the section, whatever it is, 2 up above, that's just $100,000 to help with rules.
Right.
And then there's the, whatever it was, section 8, that was specifically about a limited service position. So there are 3 different hires in here, just to be clear. And
I think that's why I'm confused as well.
Because Secretary French, you keep mentioning 2, but there really are 3.
That's my question as well. So I'm wondering, Secretary French, are you combining section 8 with section 10? It sounded like you were suggesting that the one contractor would do the work of the entire bill with the exception of section 2.
Correct.
Okay, so in other words, not 3 positions, but rather 2 positions.
Correct.
And so that the contractor would act as liaison, but would also be doing all the planning for improvements and oversight of sort of, I guess, design or whatever else is going to happen, working with subcontractors and so on.
Yeah, it's really the coordination function that's the critical piece. I mean, again, I'll use Woodstock as an example. If I think it's a good one, and I would put them on a scale of 1 to 10. They're like on the high end because they have a well-resourced professional working at the central level of their school district. They have exceedingly well done plans. They have the plans, what they had reached out to me was, well, who do we connect with at the state? Is it Efficiency Vermont? Is there someone in your agency? How do we connect with other districts doing the same work? We could use some help with our performance contract and an extra set of eyes on it. We're working with a specific vendor on our mechanical systems. It's that kind of coordination, but they're an example of a district that's like ready to go on the high end of that continuum. So for them, it's not a question of giving them planning resources. It's a question of connecting them. But also, I would argue, a role of the state is to help share what they've done with other districts that are in a much different place. And it's those districts that are in a much different place that need more from the state than others. So it's those places that don't have the centralized expertise that are going to really say, look, the state is going to say to you, our opinion, you got to get a professional in here, contract with someone to help you develop your plan. We can't do that planning for your district at the state level. You clearly don't have that expertise in house. Our advice would be to find a mechanical contractor or somebody who can do some planning development for you, because you're going to need that. So it's sort of that sort of central pair of eyes on it at this point. I think that's really going to be helpful. And I think it's fair to say districts are on a continuum in terms of what they need. It's not about the state doing the planning for each school district.
So, but you believe that then the single contractor has the capacity to direct all the school districts to someone or another contractor who can help with the planning. I'm just concerned. I just want to make sure that my concern can be allayed, that there will be too many districts coming at this one contractor for support when the contractor may be working with a Woodstock, and there might be an Orwell that needs a different level of support, or a whole lot of them out there.
Yeah. The bottleneck, I guess, is what I'm telling you, is not going to be lack of state support. It's going to be the limited number of contractors that are available to do the work. Okay. So, and funding's probably not going to be the bottleneck, but there is a finite limited number of people in the state that do this work. So whether you have 2 people at the state referring districts or 1, there are going to be, there's like 5 contractors are going to be getting those calls, and they're going to be booked. And, so that's sort of the piece of it. And I think, again, before we start hooking up with contractors per se, there needs to be some planning and prioritization done. And part of the conversation with Woodstock yesterday was to sort of help them think about, and I was talking with a school board member and their facilities manager about how they would situate their planning inside the ESSER work that's going on in their central office right now. There are, as you know, the local set aside has prioritization, 20% must be reserved for learning loss and so forth. But just to sort of help them connect what they're doing on the one hand of the organization with what the other hand of the organization is doing in terms of prioritization of their federal dollars, and also cluing them into how to situate themselves relative to potentially other federal dollars that are coming down. So it's that kind of coordination that I think is really going to be useful from the state level.
Can I ask one last question?
please.
I'm hearing everything you say, and it sounds very logical to reduce it to 2 positions. So, but as we're going along, I know you want to hit the ground running, and I think schools also want to do that. Is there any validity to having some flexibility in the bill to allow for an additional position should it be necessary? I'm just wondering if that is needed at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And I think, I totally concur. And I think I said previously, the agency should have this capacity full time, so we used to have 3 positions just managing the construction program. And I would say a lot of that management was in accounting and program oversight. It wasn't necessarily facilities expertise.
Right.
But there's no doubt, I think, that facilities quality is a precondition for education quality, and therefore the state has an interest, and therefore there should be a home for this in the agency on a permanent basis. The question is, how do we make hay while the sun shines, so to speak? We have this sort of unprecedented opportunity. We've got to do that. If we're strategic about it, coming out the other side of it, it will lead to more capacity and identification and more need, and we'll have our arms around essentially what is the prioritization and what is the need. And at that point, I would certainly welcome the opportunity, particularly since this is a 3-year project, essentially, to bring additional resources into the scope as necessary. But that's kind of not where we are right now. Particularly if we're also going to commission a review of the regulation and sort of do that sort of analysis as well. So there's going to be a needs assessment going on in the landscape. Someone's going to be working on rules. and we're also going to be coordinating stuff. So I think, that's sort of the other challenge here. Again, it's more about getting the planning sort of coordinated so we're not sort of saturating this limited environment with people. And it's going to lead to a more incoherence as opposed to coherence and addressing the need.
So you wouldn't see a need to have a flexible position or the opportunity?
Well, I think the flexibility is a good idea. I would welcome
Okay.
that opportunity. I wouldn't foreclose on it, but that's, from my perspective, gets into the nature of the ESSER, particularly if we're looking at ESSER funds.
Right.
That's part of the reason that the federal government intended the SEA or the state to have sort of that tactical flexibility as the need evolves. But I can't say at this moment in time I need that need. But I
Okay.
think flexibility is a good way to approach the issue.
Okay.
Senator Wasserman.
Thank you. So I just wanted to clarify that the position, the limited service position,
Yeah.
what it was originally in the bill for as passed out of the House, there are several responsibilities that the Agency of Education is responsible for in the bill. There's Section 2 is not only is the rule update, which is going to be contracted out for, but there's updating the school construction facility standards. There's sort of coordinating the conditions assessment. There's conducting a funding report. And there is also the certification and training for facilities management. So I think the idea that was sort of a position would be responsible for all of those tasks. It wasn't necessarily tied to coordinating construction projects, but more tied to the sort of reporting and other development of policies and guidance that this bill is asking the agency to do. So whether or not they have that capacity elsewhere, I don't know. The secretary would know that, but
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that I think that that position is contemplating maybe a different skill set than what the contractor for the facilities coordination position is.
Okay. Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, I agree. And I do have a copy of the amendment or the amendments in front of me now. So I apologize for not having that initially.
No.
I am, just hearing Ms. Wasserman tick off all the new responsibilities. And if we weren't doing a lot of other things related to COVID, I'd say this becomes the most important policy work that we're doing. But there's a lot of other things going on. And I'd say the priority, particularly from a policy perspective, is full implementation of Act 173 and special ed reform and all that support. And that's directly tied to COVID relief. So I think this is, as much as it's an important issue, I think it sort of sits on the side burner, if you will. I would strongly encourage us to focus on trying to make progress, the immediate progress in helping districts spend their one-time funding on making progress on safety and health concerns in a building, and not try to do too much of this all at once. The agency is not going to have capacity to do all these things at once. And then it brings you back to that conversation of then spending our strategic money on actual contracting and staffing for coordination, as opposed to spending the tactical money on actually making the difference in the hands of schools. So I prefer the latter approach, really putting emphasis on actually getting some work done as opposed to creating a lot of layers of coordination at the state level.
So what does that mean for the document that you're looking at right now?
First thing is I would not support inclusion of Section 5. That's to your earlier question. Now that I have that in front of me, I think that's a piece of work that belongs in that regulatory piece, and this has to do with updating the school quality standards. Not something that needs to be included in this. Again, I would encourage us to get focused on facilities.
Let me just get there, if I may. Was all of Section 5, Ms. Wasserman, is that House language or combination? That's all our language?
That was just trying to reflect the proposal from the agency about refocusing the education quality standards.
Mm-hmm.
And it was more to start a committee discussion point on whether you wanted to address that in this bill.
Is there an implementation date on that? I mean, it's good language. I mean, the question is that an immediate something that has to happen? Does it have to happen immediately? So,
My perspective on that is to put that in that container on with the state board and rules, and sort of say that's a piece of a rulemaking process that needs to happen, and let's have that conversation in a sort of a broader conversation about the construct of the education rules, including the quality rules.
Senator Persnick, please.
Yeah, I have to jump off to finance real quickly, but in section 10, I wondered if it was accurate that the $500,000 for that position, that's the way I read it, which seemed like a lot. So we're talking about the coordinator / liaison. And the way I read down in C, or B1, it says $500,000 for the purpose of describing section A of this section. So for me, that's section 10. A is contract with independent third party to assist school district using funds. So I just want to make sure, is that what we meant to spend $500,000 on this coordination and liaison?
That was my proposal, the amount as well. Once again, sort of in the spirit of, I would say, a flexibility that Senator Lyons was alluding to. It could be entities. As we get into this, we might have the need to contract for other specific, areas, whether it be heating and ventilation or something along those lines. But to really, make sure we had capacity to do coordination at the state level as those needs emerge.
Okay, good.
Mr. Secretary, please.
I was just going to observe again on, I think, Ms. Wasserman's question around, sort of trying to pull some of these things together in the agency capacity. So section 7 in particular, I know what we're looking at is sort of bringing all these different pieces together. But the idea of facilities management training certification, I think, is, definitely a laudable goal. At this moment, though, I don't think it should be a priority. Once again, I think the priority would be to move forward aggressively as possible to help districts address the immediate concerns. Certainly they could do that better if they had professionalization of their facilities management, but that's something that will be achieved over time. And I'm not sure, that's something in the immediate need. I think it would be a distraction from some of the other work that's going to be a bigger priority in this area.
Ms. Wasserman, I have to ask only because the draft I'm looking on doesn't indicate section 7. What was the genesis of this? Where did this language come from?
Section 7 came from the House.
Okay. And Mr. Secretary, you're just saying right now this isn't where the priority should be.
Correct. Particularly as we're contemplating these positions or these contracted services. I don't see, like we were trying to talk about one individuals or a couple entities and what hats they'd be wearing in this process. I don't see a lot of connection between a single entity also standing up a certification process for these facilities type positions. And I would argue, honestly, if we were to look broadly across the technical capacity of school districts, we have other areas that are deserving of similar approach, and particularly the one that stands out is business managers. We don't have a real career path and certification process for business managers. So there's a lot of work we could be doing in this area. I just don't see it as in, once again, everything's being filtered for me through a COVID sort of response lens. I don't see this rising to the same level of concern. And how to fit it all together as a project would be challenging, I think.
Okay. We'll have a little committee discussion about that afterwards. So that's section 5 you've commented on, and then removing section 7. Other suggestions based on the draft that you're seeing now?
I think, definitely support in section 7, the idea of districts working on a capital improvement plan. I think, that's also an element I brought forward as part of the school quality conversation. So, or the regulatory conversation. I think that should be a requirement of regulation. To what extent it gets enacted here, I think in my previous testimony, I signaled this would be something I would probably want to see in regulation as opposed to statute. Because I think it is, it should be an element of quality. So we get into back to the position piece, section 8, limited service position. Um, as described in subsection A. So just to be clear, that limited service position, the responsibilities of that position would be.
The responsibilities of that position were contemplated to be doing the school construction facility standards update in section 2, coordinating with the contractor, the school facilities condition assessment in section 3, doing the funding report in section 4, and then assisting with the training and certification in section 7.
So I guess my reaction would be that scope of work is ambitious. It needs to be narrowed, and then we should have a conversation, or I would recommend having a conversation about whether that should be a contract or an employee. Particularly, the timeline involved. It would take us some time to get someone on board as an employee to do all of that work. I think, the needs assessment we were talking about earlier is something I think done at a general level would be useful. I think it's a good sort of compromise way to also assist the practical work that needs to happen as a result of COVID. To what extent that I would discourage us from trying to do the certification process. So that leaves sort of an update to the rules, the piece around sort of the architectural details of the funding and so forth. That should be contracted out for sure. Again, whether we could or should we endeavor to hire someone to do that or not.
What page are you on now?
I was just going through the list. I think it's in the section A. Maybe Ms. Wasserman can point to those duties. It's sort of it runs throughout the bill, so it's kind of challenging to point to one.
Yeah, so the original contemplation for this position was to do all of the work in the bill that the bill was directing the agency to do. So so it spans all of the sections.
Okay.
And so there is the update of the rule, which would be contracted out, but there in that same section, section 2, there's also a reference to this agency working with the Superintendent's Association and the chair of the state board to update school construction facility standards. So that update, I think it was contemplated, would be done by a person who was in this kind of school construction position within the agency, in addition to the report on funding mechanisms for school construction programs, coordinating the statewide assessment, and any of the other work that the bill was. I think it was trying to address the fact that the bill is asking the agency to do a lot of work, so somebody needs to be there to be able to do it.
Mr. Secretary. Senator Lyons first, if you don't mind. Senator Lyons, please.
Not at all.
Yeah, no, so then you're putting all of that together, and then the secretary's comment about not needing the limited service position, that would then obviate all of those sections, because all the work would be done by that individual. So I guess we'd have to consider, should we go ahead and have continue to have that work going on in this bill. I'm trying to understand what would be helpful to understand, and maybe Secretary French can help me understand why if we did not have this position and we didn't have this stuff going on, I mean, that would simplify life, certainly. But what's the drawback of having it go forward? Is there, what does it do to all the capital improvement work that
Yeah.
is boots on the ground?
Yeah, I just think it's ambitious. It's clearly very ambitious, and I don't think it's doable, honestly. So I think there needs to be a prioritization on what we
That could
can
be a
do.
problem.
Yeah, minor issue. And I just, and again, I'm struggling a bit because I know the origins of some of the ideas, and I've been supportive of those ideas, and I'm trying to make a case, as I did in my testimony, that I think there should be a priority in the COVID priority before us and the opportunity with the funding.
Yeah.
At this stage in my testimony, I'm trying to help you sort of reconcile these things, because I know, if I can be helpful to your deliberations, I want to do that regardless of my earlier point of view. So I started my testimony or my commentary today on how you might do a needs assessment. Again, I wasn't seeing that as a priority, but if you want to situate that into the context, I could see a role for that. I would really start to, before we start talking about positions or contracting, I'd look at what is the work we're going to try to do in this sort of context of this opportunity, limited vendors in the state, the money coming in, and districts having urgent needs to address health and safety concerns. So that's sort of the context. And I don't really want to prioritize training of people. I don't want to prioritize rule changes. I actually want to make some progress on improving the conditions of our schools, which I know you do as well. So I just, I think we just have to be realistic, and it's not, we could add 4 positions to this and still, there's going to be a log jam of getting work done. And that's going to be limited again by the limited number of contractors available to do the work, the limited capacity of districts to digest all the good training and professional development and rule engagement that they could want. I mean, there's just the limited capacity of the system to do all of this at the same time. So I think honestly, I think if all this got passed, it wouldn't be successful, firstly. And then I think might be distracting to your question, Senator Lyons, of actually getting some work done, some practical, I would say it would divert resources that should be applied probably more directly to actually doing the work, as opposed to coordinating all these different tasks.
Thank you. That actually helps a great deal. And there's no, I'm looking at section 7 that it talks about the certification and the guidelines for picking somebody at the school and getting, up to speed. But we don't need to tell schools to have a point person unless there are guidelines and certification going on. So anyway, just a thought. Thank you.
Just looking at where we are right now, Mr. Secretary, and I appreciate your patience with me on this. This is, there are a lot of moving parts. We've heard a lot of different things. It might make sense, and I'll look to the committee if everybody's okay with this, given that the Secretary is indeed, this is everything that really he is going to have to implement and work on. And we've now heard from a lot of different people. But perhaps, Mr. Secretary, if you would be so kind as to, and I know you're a busy person, but to really, again, take a look at this draft, adjust the testimony that you've already provided us to match this draft. And I think that would be just for us to sort of rewind, see where we're at, take into consideration basically what you're saying. For me, at least in my thinking process, there are just a lot of different things going on. And I think it might make sense for us to, for me, to review again with this new draft, the one that was presented today by Ms. Wasserman, your general response to all of it. And then for us to take a look at that and then sort of pick up from there. Committee, Senator Lyons, I don't know if you look, I don't know if you need, that's just sort of where I'm at. I feel we're a little bit, just given that it's, sometimes when bills don't originate in a committee.
I know, as you were talking, I'm thinking about somebody put this language in here and has a commitment to that language. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
But I also appreciate, Secretary French, you've been through this process with the House. And don't get me wrong, I know that we all try to work with the committee that were before, and then, things evolve and want to change and make some edits in another committee on the others, in the other chamber. So I feel like you really know where things are at. And so I for one would appreciate sort of an opportunity to reflect again and see, and kind of bring the committee back, maybe on work with you and Ms. Wasserman to kind of bring us back on Friday or early next week. I mean, timing, we're okay with this right now.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And I can, the other thing for me is there's some of the language, I know where all of it basically comes from, and the advocacy behind it. I've been a part of the advocacy. So it's not just as part of the process. So I know Jeff's there. I'd certainly reach out to VSA, and if you gave me the luxury of more than a couple days, I could definitely do my best to sort of I hear the task, and to work with VSA and other partners to try to see, if I think the point of view I've started to represent is certainly during this session, probably definitely more so than previously, was the urgency around the COVID relief, and so sort of situating whatever we're doing inside of what is I'll say a project paradigm. Like we have this sort of scope of work in front of us. It's like renovating a house, and there's certain things we're not going to be able to do and certain things we are going to be able to do.
Right.
And that's sort of, I think everyone needs to struggle with that now a little bit. So I'd be happy to work on this, and certainly a couple days would be more than sufficient for us to sort of take this draft and try to work on that.
I mean, I'd be immensely grateful if maybe on Friday afternoon, you and Ms. Wasserman and other, if we could do that, or on Monday would be fine too.
Yeah, I think Monday would be a little better. We've got a couple other things scheduled for.
Yes, of course. So Monday, if that were to work, give people that time. I just feel like we're kind of bouncing all over. In just my mind, I think it would be helpful to sort of rewind a little bit. Is that committee, or Senator Lyons?
No, I think that's a really great idea, and I think part of the thinking might be that a lot of what's in here is really good, and it absolutely will, it'll have to be done at some point. So maybe it is. There are dates certain that are out further in the future, if we ever get to the end of the tunnel, so that the language isn't lost or the concepts aren't lost. We can always come back and look at what we've done, but I hate to lose the work that's going on. So somehow a date out there, I don't know.
So, Mr. Secretary and Mr. Francis, you don't mind, of course, working with Secretary French and a sort of, if we had a cafeteria, I would say, could everybody just head out for a little while and again, come back on Monday? And I'm looking to you in particular, Mr. Secretary, you're, I think, the
I was just thinking about Senator Lyons' observation, which is a good one. This idea of, and this has been a theme of our recovery planning as well. We don't really know what's in front of us from a recovery standpoint, and we have to position ourselves to find that out. We can pretty well predict that once we start assessing conditions of our facilities, we know we're going to find more work in front of us. So we should be prepared, for that eventuality, and prepared to scale up our support of that work. And there's going to have to be prioritization, obviously, but we also need to get started like now. I mean, there's districts that are anxious to get plans in place for this summer.
Absolutely.
So we need to kind of get moving, and at the same time we can anticipate the needs expanding as we understand the context better.
Yeah. Thanks for your patience, everybody, on this one. And Ms. Wasserman, if it works for you, I'm going to have Mr. Secretary kind of, again, work with you a little bit, and he'll touch base with Mr. Francis. Then Monday, I'll ask Jeannie to find a time for us all to get together and talk this through a little bit more. Senator Hooker, you're okay with that? And Senator Chittenden?
But I didn't realize we were meeting Monday.
No, I was going to just to meet with them and then present it to the committee on Tuesday.
Thank you. And as long as it's clear, what the intent is, what we need to do in this bill, because there are so many moving parts here.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Okay. So we'll look forward to being in contact and find some time and go through things on Monday. So thanks, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Francis, thanks for being with us and your willingness to work with the agency as usual. And Ms. Wasserman, really appreciate you sticking with us on this. Great. Have a good
Happy to help.
afternoon.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
Okay, committee. So is that feels okay? I, for one, was just getting, I just needed to take a pause. So,
Yeah, we could have thrown out everything and then realized, oh my gosh, all that work is gone.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so we will have Dan, Secretary French back in tomorrow, but to look at the literacy bill. We also have two of the governor's appointees coming in tomorrow to the state board to share their thoughts, basically, why they want to be on the state board and some of their background. And we'll also hear more from Mr. Demarais and Coach Christie on the language that we worked on today. So, okay, that's it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon. Cheryl, do you mind staying on for 1 second?